Hi, this is Paul. Some of you remember Han Shu. He's been on my channel. He's been with Grim Grizz. He's most reliably found on Twitter. He's been writing. I think he finished his one of his master's thesis. He's lives in the Bay Area. We've met. He sent me. He's a very reliable source of interesting content that he knows will interest me. And he sent me this video from a channel called Mass of the Ages, and it has Alex O'Connor and Father Gregory Pine. And it was a good video. Gregory Pine, I think, I don't know if I've heard anyone on YouTube quite so calmly and systematically walk through sort of classical Western Christian positions. And in fact, a lot of the arguments that he made, I could imagine various Protestants making very similar arguments because of course beneath Protestantism is Catholicism over here in Latin Christendom. But and of course I've really been enjoying Alex O'Connor lately. He's I just saw that hang on. Glenn Scrivener had on Speak Life a video recently, 10 times Alex O'Connor played the Christian better than most Christians. And so Alex O'Connor has really emerged, in my opinion, to be one of the premier conversation partners after sort of I would say the decline, the churn-based decline of sort of the Christian atheist thing. He still does that shtick. He recently did one, and Glenn covered it as well. You know, I pretty much leave the covering the Christian versus atheist beat to Glenn Scrivener. I think Glenn knows that stuff really well, and I think he covers it fairly. And so I sort of like, and you know, I know Glenn a bit at least, so I trust Glenn. Had my first UK sausage roll with Glenn. My first trip to the UK, we stopped along the side of a highway someplace, and he said, "Do you want a bite to eat?" I said, "Sure." I said, "Well, give me something that's of your land," and he gave me a sausage roll, and it was delicious. And he took a picture of me eating the sausage roll, and it was wonderful. So I love what Glenn does, and I think the world of Glenn, and I really have come to appreciate Alex O'Connor, this performance notwithstanding. Now, again, Gregory Pine seemed like an absolutely lovely person, and I think in some ways, right away, if you're going to sit across the table with a guy who's taken vows of celibacy and has devoted his life to monasticism, at one point in this conversation, he talks about the fact that, well, maybe I should just find it and clip it, because it was maybe we'll just talk about it. It was a beautiful statement where he said, you know, boy, when I got into this, it was just like I was just all excited about everything, and then the longer I was in it, the more I realized the cost and the weight. And what was so interesting about this conversation is that most of the points that Alex O'Connor made boil down to one thing. He kept making the same point over and over and over in the conversation, basically saying, is it fair? I look at the universe, and if I were to imagine an all-good, all-powerful God, so you sort of have the problem of suffering in the background, an all-good, all-powerful God making a universe. And in some ways, when Christians bring out, well, but it's a rebellious universe. Yeah, but he didn't. You know, you think an all-good, all-powerful God would have made a bulletproof universe in which you know, even if people did stumble, then they wouldn't have to suffer so much. They're just in our judgment, there's more suffering than your story tends to allow, given the absolutes you're dealing with. And again, Gregory Pine sort of very patiently, very calmly, very winsomely, I think, and humbly sort of walks through whole ranges of, I think, very competent Christian arguments, but nothing really satisfies, at least within this little picture frame, nothing really satisfies Alex's answer. Alex had at one point a lovely comment in the video where he said, "Yeah, if I ever decide to become a Christian, I think I'll wait to announce it when I'm having one of these debates, and then I'll get to the end of the debate and say, oh, you were right. There it is. I'm a Christian now," because it sort of exposes the frame, the shtick, the kayfabe of these kinds of conversations, and that we have a sense that are they real conversations? Are things really going on here, or are we just presenting the argument? What exactly are we doing here? And I think those questions have sort of matured to the point that Alex O'Connor more reliably in these kinds of events is in a place where he can, on one hand, I think very credibly and honestly, give the reasons why he doesn't believe, even if part of him would like to believe and wants to believe. He's got doubts, and they're to the point that, and he's willing to share his reasons for doubting, and I respect that. Now I'm going to play a clip here where basically it's the heart of Alex's argument, and I'll just play it now.
Well, I'm suspicious of the idea of a best possible world, especially when talking about one with divine authorship, because it seems as though there's no intrinsic maximum here. There's always something that can be somehow improved, even if it's just like the presence of more goods. You can just create a whole other planet Earth somewhere in the universe that's untouchable by the other. They'll never interact with each other. And you can keep doing this. You can keep making the universe bigger. There'll always be, if that's the case, a better possible world. And so there is no such thing as the best possible world. And so to complain that we're not in the best possible world is, I think, a mistake, because how could we be if there is no such thing? That does leave us with a sort of strange image of God almost arbitrarily picking somewhere in the middle of, there's not even a middle. We're talking about a sort of potentially infinite increase in goods. And so just sort of arbitrarily picking a stopping point and saying, that'll do it. It doesn't seem to me what's going on. Maybe this talk of possible worlds is the wrong way to think about it altogether. But the problem remains that God, in the Christian understanding, is a personal God whose aim and reason for creating the universe is to allow human beings, some would say coerce human beings, into a relationship with him. If that's the goal, if that's the desire, then it seems strange to me that some people are given an easy ride in this respect. They either get some form of religious experience, perhaps they receive a prophecy, perhaps they even get to meet the risen Christ himself. But not me, not my friends, not people that I know, probably not yourself. I don't know, you may have had a religious experience in your life, but I'm not sure that you've met Jesus and you know the way in which I mean that. In which case, there seems to be a sort of crude element of favoritism going on. If not favoritism, then experiences granted to others that, if granted to me, would allow me to be in a position or compel me to be in a position to inherit eternal life that I'm not receiving through no fault of my own. And yet this could be the deciding factor as to my eternal fate. This seems unfair, for a start, and that's one of the atheists' main gripes, is unfairness. This seems unfair. It's unfair that people suffer. It's unfair that religious belief is scattered in predictable ways, and I'm not among the favored, the elect. This is, I think, probably the principal emotion behind the power of this argument, and why people so often refer to it, is that it seems unfair. And if God is anything, it seems he must be fair. I don't know if you'd agree with that. I imagine that you would agree that God would be fair, but that, I think, puts you in a position of having to defend the fairness, or having to believe that there is, in principle, a defense of the fairness of the kind of distribution that I've described.
So as is often the case, I started listening to this yesterday, and then I woke up early in the morning, and because we get these weird holiday schedules now where my wife is off work and we've got a lot of kids in the house, and we tend to stay up late doing things, and actually I had to make a late night run to the airport and pick up some kids who were flying back in, and so everything was quiet and sleepy in the morning, and I woke up before everyone else, and I didn't really want to make a lot of commotion and wake people up. so that I just okay, I'll just listen to something while I lay here quietly in bed, and if I fall asleep, that's fine. So then I continued listening to this piece. Mornings are also a very fertile time in terms of, I'm very awake. There's it's everything's quite quiet. And so I had a thought. I had a thought. And I thought, well, I want to write down my thought, because if I don't write down my thought is going to be gone. So I woke up, and often Twitter is the place where I like to write down my thoughts. And I was playing with Substack before, and I think I'm going to return to Substack again. In the past, I was sort of taking this and, taking the things that I did in Twitter and then putting them on the Substack because I sort of want to keep them. But that takes, usually in the morning, I'll have, 10 or 15 minutes just to go bang, 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 and just get all the thoughts down, just one draft, put them out there. And then someone will get up, and I've got to empty the dishwasher, and I've got to, well, the dog's gone now, but got a good report from the dog. Dog's doing well in doggy training. But, so then the day starts, and then I'm, paying attention to my kids and my wife, and, and then going to work and getting dressed and doing all those things. So just have time for just to bang, get this thing out there. And it's also the case that sometimes I get up in the morning and bang, got to get this thing out there. And I look at it with the bright light of day, and I read it, and it's like, what was I thinking? Was I fully awake? Was I dreaming? What's going on in this head of mine? But you throw it out to Twitter, and see what comes back, because Twitter's a place where people speak their minds, and that's fine. So I'll basically follow the tweet to maybe recapture some of the arguments that I made. Thank you, Hanshu, for the recommendation with Cosmic Skeptic. A few thoughts. We'll see if I make a video. Here we are. And also, if I get my thoughts down, it sort of makes it easier getting in to make the video. I'm not quite so scatterbrained and ADHD and thoughts all over the place. I know some of you like that, but it can tend to be... I distract myself. There's a deep irony here that the heart of the argument of this democratic individualist is that God is not a democratic individualist. Since goodness is democratic individualism, and the universe I see by my own lights does not seem to be such, therefore God is not good or powerful or existent. The most obvious solution to this is, one, the world is a product of chaos. Now, I meant to link in the conversation with Elizabeth Oldfield, Rowan Williams, Alex O'Connor, and this thing here, which I covered a little bit. And again, what was very interesting about this was that nobody wanted to really stand up there and say, yeah, the universe is just a product of chaos, and everything is here for reasons not only we don't know, we can't know, because there is no such reason. And so therefore, I think people have the sense that, and this is exactly where my argument is going to go. People have the sense that doesn't go anywhere. And if it doesn't go anywhere, even if it's true, I'm not going to live with it because it can't be lived with. And so that's where you sort of get into kind of a Darwinian truth, Petersonian intimation that, well, if the truth isn't something that you can actually live with, well, then maybe it isn't true, because we're alive and we're living with something. And it would be a terrible shame if both the glory and the suffering of existence were just a happy or unhappy accident. But I respect that as well, maybe that's one of the reasons that the universe is as it is. And of course, a good many people have looked at the universe and seen the happiness and the sadness and seen all sorts of suffering that seems unreasonable and said, But when you really begin to live in that, it kills. And so a lot of what I did when I sort of started playing around with YouTube, when Jordan Peterson came around, and so many of those early Randos conversations, when I look back on them, I see a whole population suffering from nihilism-induced depression. And watching Jordan Peterson videos, seemed to get him out of it. So that's something. And the fact that if nihilism is true, why do you need a commitment to the truth? Just do whatever the heck you want. And if you're happier and more moral, if even if morality isn't a thing, and if basically there's no reason to not be delusionally sacrificial and become a monk. There's no reason not, or become Andrew Tate, or there's just no reason to anything. And very quickly, people find this not only undesirable, but difficult to live with. And so then, again, we're sort of swing back to the Jordan Peterson intimation that if it's difficult to live with, and the universe is so brimming with life, that might not be true. So I think for that reason, the world is a product of chaos and is meaningless. That idea is receding. Again, that's not an argument that it isn't true. It's just an observation that, true or not true, people can't live with it. And for some strange reason, people would like to live. So screw that idea. 2, the world is a product of a dim God. So what was the dude's name all the way over on the right? Philip Goff. That was his epiphany, having been worshiping with the Orthodox. Hey, don't blame me for that. That's totally on him. From what I know of all the Orthodox people I know, I don't think anybody would ever get that idea from listening to the Orthodox people I know, but that's the epiphany he's had worshiping with the Orthodox. And that's the one he came with. And so, okay, that's your idea. It didn't seem to carry a lot of weight there. And the third idea is that the world is the product of an evil God. And so Alex O'Connor, even though he said repeatedly, I'm not a Gnostic, but he also kept being really excited about Gnostic ideas and saying, well, this is really helpful, all these Gnostic ideas. And Rowan Williams kind of looked at him like, Rowan Williams kind of looked at him like as somebody who's gotten his driver's license and been driving for 30 years, looking over at someone who just got his driver's license. This car thing is great. And it's like, well, it's a car. I don't really think that Gnostic thing will go too far. But you're young, you're excited. There you have it. What can I do about that? And again, that sort of points to where I'm going to be going with this because, well, let's keep going. To repeat, because I've already distracted you, the person making the complaint that things are unfair is a judger. It's someone making an evaluation and suggesting that based on the evaluation, the Christian view of God seems unreasonable. Now, again, lots of years ago, I read Alvin Plantinga's God, Freedom, and Evil. And Alvin Plantinga, if I recall correctly, it's been a number of years since I read that book. Alvin Plantinga sort of makes a best of all possible worlds argument, which I found interesting. I should really pull that book out. It's not a very big book. It's just a little book. And a lot of it was such, so analytically philosophical that it was just like page. But I could get enough of it to say, okay, I kind of understand what you're going. And the summation of the book was, the problem of evil is not technically a problem philosophically, but is a problem pastorally. And Tim Keller in his book on suffering basically says a similar thing. All right, so most obvious solution to this is the world is a product of chaos, the world is a product of dim God, the world is a product of an evil God. The product of chaos argument is receding, as Plantinga and Lewis and many others have noted, because it eliminates the possibility of rational purchase upon the world. It goes nowhere. In other words, someone looks at the world and says, I have looked at the world and come to the rational conclusion that the world is a product of chaos. Lewis, Plantinga, a whole bunch of people that Lewis pointed to at the beginning of the 20th century said, you have the problem of intelligibility with this. Because if the world is chaos and your thoughts are chaos, Lewis runs through this briefly in his argument on in miracles. Alvin Plantinga's famous for having run through the argument. Basically, you can't trust your faculties because your faculties are also a product of chaos. Because, and I know you get self-organizing criticality and some of these other fancy words, but I don't know how you're going to get rationality out of chaos, especially given the fact that if I make a rational judgment about the pervasive pluralism of supposedly rational conclusions that people not only make in the contemporary world but throughout history, would lead me to doubt that rationality probably isn't going to get us out of this mess. And I tend to think that the likes of McGilchrist or Vervaeke are correct, that rationality is a helpful tool that is useful in smaller measurements. It's sort of analogous, let's say, to Newtonian mechanics. Again, I'm reading Spencer Klavin's book, Light of the World, or Light of the, I forget the name, but it's Spencer Klavin's new book. I'm going to have a conversation with him. I'm going to send him an email and say, Spencer, let's have the conversation. I'm also through your book. I love his book. His book is awesome. It's pitched just right, and it's beautifully written. And get the audiobook. It's beautifully read. So I love his book. But, you know, he nicely sort of walks through a whole bunch of science in a very easy, accessible, winsome way. And basically, you know, Newtonian mechanics was really cool. And Newtonian mechanics is really important, but only use it within sort of a frame of reference, which is sort of our size. Because it begins to break down when you get to the very fast or the very large or the very small. But sort of in human-sized things, in scales that we can sort of keep in our head, the mathematical analogy, again, the book The Blind Spot, also an excellent book that Vervaeke has recommended. You know, the math is close enough with Newtonian mechanics that, yeah, you can figure stuff out and it works pretty good. I think rationality is sort of that way too. Rationality works pretty good. But once you get up to like theory of everything, and this is pretty much Alvin Plantinga's argument in God, Freedom, and Evil, our math won't work at that scale simply because, and this is again similar to Peugeot's point, we don't have a vantage point from which to make these calculations. Thomas Nagel makes the same point. And this, I think, is the serious problem with Alex O'Connor's continual argument. Now, in all fairness, he's just telling us what he thinks. And fair enough, we all get our opinions. But if you're sort of living in a world that there's sort of scalable rationality, and I think in some ways Alex O'Connor has kind of left that behind, as more and more people are sort of leaving it behind, because it seems that if rationality and intelligibility are actually going to be true guides in terms of telling us anything about the universe, then there might be, and this is, I think, similar to, I've learned a lot of this from Vervaeke. Well, that might suggest something about the designer of the universe. And then we're knocking on the question of the dim God or the evil God. If the world is a product of an evil God, then we're all more screwed than a world of mere chaos. And so that argument, you don't even need to pursue that. Because if the world is a product of an evil God who is basically just here to sadistically torture us and need not honor the boundaries of death, then it's just sort of eternal conscious torment all the way down. So, well, there you have that. And again, it's interesting in this video that O'Connor also sort of presumes the foundational narrative of Christianity is Bible is basic instructions before leaving earth, heaven is reward, hell is punishment. Now, I'm not saying there's no truth to that fairly simple framework, but many Christians will say, yeah, but that's sort of like saying being an American citizen is like paying taxes. Well, paying taxes as an American citizen is something that you do, but that's not really what being an American citizen is about. Those manifestations and realities. Right now, the last couple of days, the corner has been raging with conversations about universalism and eternal conscious torment, and the corner loves to have those fights. But and I'm not making an argument on one way or another with respect to that, but the Bible is the story of the reconciliation of heaven and earth, not a great sorting mechanism between heaven and hell. And as a Protestant who reads the Bible, and I began to awaken to this when I was younger than Alex O'Connor, when I was in college, because I was a young Christian man who was going off to college, Christian school. I'd gone to Christian school all my life, going to a Christian college. But you get far enough away from mom and dad, it's like, hey, you can do what you want. Go to church, not go to church. Live moral, live immorally. Calvin College in the 1980s wasn't really going to intervene. And so I decided I kind of want to read the Bible and come to my own conclusions about this strange book that I've known all my life. And now someone might say, of course, while you read it, you were so formed by it. And this, again, gets part of the argument that I'm going to make. Of course, you come to the outcomes you come to. But actually, I read the Bible, and a lot of the sort of assumptions that what the book is really about is sort of a sorting machine between heaven and hell. When I was reading the Bible, I didn't really find that to be what the Bible was like or about. It was far more complex. And then as, of course, I continued to grow and mature and learn, even though great portions of the church have long sort of, I can understand why Alex O'Connor sort of frames Christianity in that light, because many Christians do. And I'm not going to judge them for it. I understand a certain point of view and perspective. I think it's a certain reduction, but I understand that. But part of the difficulty is that the reduction creates some of the problems that Alex O'Connor seems to continue to bring up. And given his intelligence and education, I don't know if this point is sort of where he's stuck, or is this just sort of an easy Christian opponent to keep pointing to and torture this lovely. I don't know all the I got to sit down. Somebody's got to make me a chart of, like, because I'm going to Ireland and I'm going to be staying with some monks, and I stayed with Capuchins. I stayed with Capuchins in Washington, D.C. And the only reason I can remember that is because of the monkey. But they're not like the monkeys. They were, so I'm staying with the monks in Ireland, and I'm super excited about it because my experience with Catholic monastics has been lovely. They're wonderful people. I loved, why can't I remember his name? Dutch, very popular with Protestants. It'll sink in anywhere. I've got a poster of his famous prodigal son that he wrote the book about. Oh shoot, mental block. Anyway, so but I never know what sort of the little initials and everything means. And okay, so in Ireland we're with the Dominicans, and of course Francis is a Franciscan. And the Jesuits, of course, are famous for historical reasons, but I have difficulty keeping them all straight. Anyway, but he seemed like an absolutely lovely guy, and smart and sincere. Again, like I said, just to sit across the table with a guy like that, who's obviously very intelligent, very well read, very loyal to his church, very winsome, very very attractive individual. Good on Alex, because gutsy. So, if the world is a product of a dim God, and we have the lights to evaluate the dimness of God, and right there is the issue. but not the means to finally correct him, her, them, they, whatever pronoun, God, they're my pronouns. That's not a great improvement. It's the moral indignation of the rat caught in the trap of the children's room. I liked that line because you want to sort of get the idea that, first of all, even if you're like Philip Goff and thinking, yeah, maybe God was sort of dim, or certain strains of Gnosticism making that argument, it's sort of like sitting down and watching professional basketball and football players and criticizing them. They're from my easy chair with, 30, 40, how many extra pounds do I have on me since I was 21? My doctor's always like, you're tall so you can carry the weight, but that doesn't mean you should. Maybe I better go carnivore, take that weight off. I like eating other things, though. They're delicious. Anyway, I digress. Collectively, the best of our scientists today continue to discover how much they don't know and continue to recognize that the world is far more complex. And so then you're sort of in a very ancient dilemma, which I think continues to be a very helpful one to keep an eye on. We can use this, is the foundation, is the source of being, is being itself, whatever, and I think all words fail, is it fundamentally personal or impersonal? And again, Hindus, wrestled with this. And again, I look at Ezekiel Kaufman, and you can look at Christine Hayes's lessons on the Old Testament. It's either 2 or 3. Someone pointed that to me early, where, well, if it's a dim God, well, you might be sort of back in paganism, where there's sort of this meta-divine realm, and in it somehow, just read mythology. I mean, so many of these basic issues were wrestled with in antiquity. Well, a dim God made it, but okay, you might think that God is dim, and you might look at LeBron and say, he doesn't really play as good as he did when he was 23. Yeah, but little 21-year-old, do you play better than LeBron? There might be some in the NBA that do right now, but I don't really think that we're in the position, even based on science, where we keep discovering more and more and how little and little we know and how bad we are at managers of this world. I don't really think we're in a position to sort of say, you're not doing a great job. And to add to that, I was just in the car this afternoon with someone who might be mistaken for a homeless person. And he basically said, all these homeless people, the government should do more. And I thought, But a lot of times it's people that thinks the government should do more. And it's people who've never really had more to do. It's sort of the Dunning-Kruger effect on a cosmic scale. Well, that might be a good title. And so, part of the rat caught in the children's room reminded me of when I was a missionary in the Dominican Republic, and, rats were an issue. I'll just say that. Rats were an issue. And because I had little kids, I didn't want to have, later on when my kids were older and I deal with rats here in North America, I'd get those big old wooden traps and go whack. And boy, that spring was hot. That spring was strong. And that would, hit that rat's head pretty hard, and it would shake around and then expire. But in the Dominican Republic, I had little kids trawling around on the floor, and, rats would come in, and the wife's like, I don't want rats with my children. I didn't want them with my children either. So I had this live trap that, it was kind of a cool little contraption, and a little metal thing that they had made down there, and I put the little bait on the hook, and the rat would call in the trap and eat on it, and At least he got the treat there. I mean, the American traps are so stingy. So I'd catch rats in that trap. Well, now I've got a live rat in a trap. Well, what are you going to do with that live rat? And some people are like, well, why don't you let him out? Yeah, you let him out, he'll be back in the next day. Only some of the rats were born in the house, and you'd find the nests and things under the cupboards and stuff. Anyway, enough rat stories. Well, almost enough rat stories. The easiest way to deal with a rat is you get a bucket, you fill it with water, you take the live trap. Boy, I don't know if YouTube's going to like me saying this. I know we squeamish North Americans, we like to have exterminators come and do these things, but you take that rat in that live trap and you dip it in the water and you wait. Mice are really cute. And so, of course, when you get a mouse in the house and you catch it and the kids are little and they look at it, they're like, oh, he's so cute. Can we keep him? No, we really can't. And then for a while we did have, with my kids, we homeschooled the kids and we had all sorts of pets. And so we had guinea pigs, we had mice, we never had rats. The tails always sort of freak me out. But guinea pigs are lovely and mice can be fun. But we never keep the caught mice for that. But anyway, yeah, I watched those little rats die. A little part of my big cold heart felt a little bad for the drowning rats as I submerged them and took their little lives in that bucket of water. And when I think about us relating to that which would be possible to create a universe as filled with glory and complexity as this one. Okay, pain, fair enough. I think I don't know if I'm in a place, that little rat is not in a position to judge me. Not that he doesn't have his opinion. But, hey, I've got my kids. Such a thing as hantavirus. I can't have you scampering around my house with my toddlers who are walking around on these floors. And you're not the kind of creature that I can sit down and have a chat with and reason with and say, now, Mr. Rat, it's important for you to go out the door and live out there in the field where all my neighbors are just throwing their garbage. There's plenty for you to eat out there. No, they come in the house and they infest the kitchen. And I've got to deal with them. And the sentence for infesting the kitchen is death. And I will try to be a moral executioner and not evade the cost, the little bit of suffering that I have watching that poor little rat die, and take his life and be there with him as I send him away. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Seldom does the democratic individualist ask about the good fortune they have received to attain such an exalted state from which to judge the dim God. And this is where, again, almost all of his arguments are, understandably so, made as a democratic individualist, because that's who he is. And so, of course, and this, again, belays the fact that all judging we do say at least as much about us as others. Human beings have lived for a very long time, and the number of democratic individualists, judging from the book about being weird here in the West, seems shrinkingly small. And yet, well, fair enough, if we're going to judge the dim God, we'll judge him by the lights that we have. But this again raises the whole point of the monarchical vision, the view from nowhere. When Jonathan Peugeot talks to these celebrity atheists, often say, well, where are you standing? And they're like, I'm sitting. No, you don't understand. And of course, Alex O'Connor gets this. He sat there and watched Jordan Peterson and Richard Dawkins. Was this the product of chaos or merit, this supposedly privileged view of democratic individualists? An honest one will admit they inherited these lights from their cultural ancestors. Those ancestors were not formed by either worldview in the world, but rather one specific historical thread, by any worldview in the world, but one specific historical thread that they take pride in, as if they had the brilliance to develop it themselves rather than being their heirs. That thread, as Tom Holland has noted, seems to grow out of the story they have condemned. one of a brotherhood of humanity despite our inequalities and love for our inferiors, all from a man who endorsed the stories they find barbaric. Stories of the Old Testament. The barbaric story they protest, it appears, has delivered to them their prized perspective, while it delivered to him who endorsed those old stories a Roman cross. The conclusion of which they deny in their skepticism, because Christians say, well, he in fact endured a Roman cross. He in fact endured suffering. He, as I think it was Camus said, did not, in the Christian story, remove himself. He had the privilege as creator of non-suffering and did not exclude himself from the suffering we have and know. And Christians have been saying this all the way back, even at a time when there were no democratic individualists. That wasn't even a thought. Now, again, that doesn't fully remove the question, because people have looked around at the universe for a very long time, and the pagan worldview that said, well, it's fundamentally impersonal, but there are powerful spirits and beings out there, and the world is made by gods who are dim, evil, capricious, whatnot. So these are very old arguments. But then Jesus comes along, and this is where it's interesting, because, okay, so I should first note C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis wrote about this in his book, Miracles. Surprise, surprise. The mention of that nation turns our attention to one of those features in the Christian story which is repulsive to the modern mind. To be quite frank, we do not at all like the idea of a chosen people. And again, this is what O'Connor keeps coming back to again and again in the story. Democrats by birth and education, we should prefer to think that all nations and individuals start level in the search for God. And again, this is what O'Connor hits on again and again through this. Or even that all religions are equally true. I just caught a little bit of Zach Stein's conversation with Brendan Graham Dempsey, and I was interested in it because he's like, we're gonna finally get perennialism right, because if we can finally establish an objective value in the world, and so he basically and Brendan Graham Dempsey pushes back on him, basically says, well, just make value a presupposition and that'll fix it. And again, I listen to this and I think, I've read Lewis on most of these things. These things have been around for a long time. Remember the guy in The Great Divorce who wanted to smuggle something from the real land back into the gray city, because if we could just get something real in here, then we can build our economy and really save this world. Democrats by birth and education, we should prefer to think that all nations and individuals start level in their search for God, or even that all religions are equally true. It must be admitted at once that Christianity makes no concessions to this point of view. It does not tell of a human search for God at all, but of something done by God for, to, and about man. And the way in which it is done is selective, undemocratic to the highest degree. After the knowledge of God has been universally lost or obscured, one man from the whole earth, Abraham, is picked out. He is separated, miserably enough, we may suppose, from his natural surroundings, sent to a strange country, and made the ancestor of a nation who are to carry the knowledge of the true God. Within this nation there is a further selection. Some die in the desert, some remain behind in Babylon. There is further selection still. The process grows narrower and narrower, sharpened at last to one small bright point like the head of a spear. Hey, this is the time of year for this. It is a Jewish girl at her prayers. All humanity, so far as concerns its redemption, has narrowed to that. Such a process is very unlike that modern feeling demands, but it is startlingly like what nature habitually does. Selectiveness, and with it, we must allow, enormous wastage, which Alex O'Connor usually mentions in a lot of these things, is her method. Out of enormous space, a very small portion is occupied by matter at all, Of all the stars, perhaps very few, perhaps only one, have planets. Well, now there are more planets out there. Of the planets in our own system, probably only one supports organic life. In the transmission of organic life, countless seeds and spermatozoa are emitted. Some few are selected for the distinction of fertility. Among the species, only one is rational. Within that species, only a few attain excellence of beauty, strength, or intelligence. At this point, we come perilously near the argument of Butler's famous analogy. I say perilously because the argument of that book very nearly admits parody in the form, you say that the behavior attributed to the Christian God is both wicked and foolish, but it is no less likely to be true on account, for I can show that nature, which he created, behaves just as badly. To which the atheist will answer, and as near he is to Christ in his heart, the more certainly he will do so. If there is a God like that, I despise and defy him. And this is where we're going to go. But I'm not saying that nature, as we now know her, is good. That is a point we must return to in a moment. Nor am I saying that a God whose actions were no better than nature's would be a proper object of worship for any honest man. The point is a little finer than that. The selective and undemocratic quality in nature, at least insofar as it affects human life, is neither good nor evil. According as spirit exploits or fails to exploit this natural situation, he's reaching into older arguments in the book. It permits on one hand ruthless competition, arrogance, and envy. It permits on the other modesty. And I think this is part of where Gregory Pine was going in the argument. And one of our greatest pleasures, admiration. In a world in which I was really, and not merely by a useful legal fiction, as good as everyone else, in which I never looked up to anyone wiser or cleverer or braver or more learned than I, would be insufferable. And this is a really strong point that I was just listening to, I think it was the 5th Gospel series, and Peterson made the point about Solzhenitsyn, about communism. Now, communism supposedly wants to make everything equal. And what implicitly O'Connor keeps arguing here is that if there was really good God, he would have made the world already sort of as the communists would imagine. But he's not going to say that, because we've already seen what human beings do when we try to create that as our arena. We don't like it. Even the masters of the communist world wanted to reserve for themselves the privileges they withheld from the masses, because it can't be any other way. The world is such that there are lots of trade-offs all over the place. Now, again, you might say a better God would have created no trade-offs. But the truth is, I don't think Alex or any of us want to live in that world at all. We're saying that would be the best possible world. And it'd be like, okay, well, why don't you join a commune? Well, I don't want to join a commune. Well, why not? You're saying that's the best possible world. So sort of what you're saying is that if this is the best possible world, you're either the dim or the evil God, because you don't actually want the world that you yourself say is the best possible world. The very fans of the cinema stars and the famous footballers know better than to desire that. The Christian story does not. What the Christian story does is not to instate on the divine level a cruelty or wastefulness which have already disgusted us on the natural, but to show us in God's act, working neither cruelly nor wastefully, the same principle which is in nature also. Though down there it works something in one way and something in the other. It illuminates the natural scene by suggesting that a principle which is first looked meaningless may yet be derived from a principle which is good and fair. May indeed be a depraved or a blurred copy of it. The pathological form which it would take is a spoiled nature. For when we look into the selectiveness which the Christians attribute to God, we find in it none of that favoritism which we were afraid of. The chosen people are chosen not for their own sake, certainly not for their own honor and pleasure, but for the sake of the unchosen. Abraham is told that in his seed, the chosen nation, all nations shall be blessed. That nation has been chosen to bear a heavy burden. Their sufferings are great, but as Isaiah recognizes, their sufferings heal others. On the final selected woman falls the utmost depth of maternal anguish. Her son, the incarnate God, is a man of sorrows, the one man into whom deity descended, the one man who can be lawfully adored, is preeminent for suffering. But now you will ask, does this much mend matters? Is not this still injustice? Though now the other way around, where at a glance we accused God of undue favor in his chosen, we are now tempted to accuse him of undue disfavor. The attempt to keep up both charges at the same time had better be dropped. And certainly, we have here to come to a principle very deeply rooted in Christianity, what may be called the principle of vicariousness. The sinless man suffers for the sinful, and in their degree, all good men for all bad men. And this vicariousness, capitalized, no less than death and rebirth, capitalized, or selectiveness, capitalized, is also a characteristic of nature, capitalized. Self-sufficiency, living on one's own resources, is a thing impossible in her realm. Everything is indebted to everything else, sacrificed to everything else, dependent on everything else. And here too we must recognize that the principle is in itself neither good nor bad. The cat lives on the mouse in a way I think bad. I killed the rat in a way that felt bad. The bees and the flowers live on one another in a more pleasing manner. Alex O'Connor has obviously wrestled greatly with the question of eating animals. The parasite lives on its host, but so also the unborn child on its mother. In social life, without vicariousness, there would be no exploitation or oppression, but also no kindness or gratitude. It is a fountain, both of love and hatred, both of misery and happiness. When we have understood this, we shall no longer think that the depraved examples of vicariousness in nature forbid us to suppose that the principle itself is of divine origin. Miracles, a preliminary study, pages 187 to 191. I'll put a link to, I posted this on my blog. Let's see, when did I do it? November 16, 2017. Probably I just started making videos then. A blog I use sort of as a file cabinet to keep things. And I think that's really part of what I would like to have heard in the video, because Lewis is definitely getting at something there. He's got shorter versions of this argument in some of his other books as well. I wonder just how rational these democratic individuals are without the validation and vindication of an empty tomb. It would seem their path leads to a very frustrating nihilism, from which they long to believe the tomb leaver. What is the price for believing that tomb leaving is possible, not just for this Galilean, but also for them, and not just for the strong and the brilliant, but for the dim and the unfortunate? See, I think a big part of the problem is we have to judge, but we can't but judge from who we are and where we stand. And fair enough, anybody who's watched me long enough knows I don't want Alex O'Connor to lie about how he feels. I appreciate the fact that he makes a video and has the temerity to sit across the table from a man who has sacrificed a great deal and will likely throughout his life never gather any of the wealth, opportunity, women, children. This monk has sacrificed a lot. And I think many of us watching it, well, we may call him a fool, but part of us respects him. Maybe not. Now, the Vikings storming across England in the early days might not have respected him, if at least if any of these Viking shows that I watched a number of years ago are any indication. You know, oh, you stupid people with your stupid god slaughter. Your stupid god. The gods we appreciate are the gods who will stand up and give us a fight. Valhalla. We war against each other every day, die and respawn to do it all over. It's one video game forever. They're not democratic individualists. And in fact, much of human history has not been filled with democratic individualists. How long will democratic individualists last? I don't know. But the argument, it's not really an argument. It's basically an insinuation. And it's insinuation made from a particular perspective. And this, again, is where the story of Jesus and those who follow it, like this young monk, gain some purchase on us. Because, well, Job, family was killed, riches were taken away. Yeah, he had something to say. It's a long book. And you can find our friend Jess if you want to talk about it. He's got no end of desire to talk about the book of Job. But Jesus comes and, you know, at least if you believe the text, heals whole villages. At least that's his reputation. In a place where healing whole villages would be something that would draw a crowd. And then they listen to him. But of course, they don't quite understand him. And even his closest sort of love him and fear him, but when the chips are down, abandon him. And he dies alone on the cross, watched by women and children, mocked by his enemies. If anyone would have a position to say God is not fair, you would think the cross would have made a pretty potent pulpit to do it from. And in fact, part of the reason we don't find that extraordinary is because just about everyone who somehow is maimed or tortured or goes to the gallows or goes to the chair or goes to the cross will say exactly that. It's not fair. I'm being oppressed. I mean, that's exactly what we expect to hear from people. But Jesus doesn't do that. Now, he does offer a word. My God, why have you forsaken me? He doesn't answer it. Our questions aren't a problem, which is why, again, I'm glad Alex raises them. And why the book of Job isn't judged for asking the questions. And I don't blame the little rats that I drowned for looking at me and say, how can you do this to me? I'm the kind of creature that, even if you studied all your life and gathered billions of dollars of grants, you could not reproduce me in a lab, and here you carelessly drown me in a bucket of water. And I did. And this is part of the reason why Christianity is just so darn tough to get rid of. Because everyone complains, it's not fair. But when my children were little and they would complain to that, well, probably sometimes they were right. It wasn't fair. But every good parent, I had 5 children, knows fairness wasn't exactly what love required for me and my wife to raise our children in the best way we thought we could. And we're far from perfect people. There were slightly different rules for the children. With some things, there was a pretty steady bar. For other things, this one needs this, and this one needs this, and this one needs that, because love requires it. And that goes all the way back to Lewis's point that, it's really funny how in the 1920s and 30s, all of the intellectuals sort of looked at the Soviet Union and thought, wow, that's the wave of the future. The whole world should live like that. As long as you just basically recognize that Stalin starved Ukraine. Just read Bloodlands and Black Earth by, what's his name? I'm having trouble with names today. Snyder. Don't read those books if you're prone to depression. Those are rough books. And I think this gets back to the principle of vicariousness that Lewis pointed out. That somehow what God leads us into is not so much the kind of impersonal, rule-based, egalitarian, same-samey world that we think would be fair. Truth is, people don't like fair. People want to be lottery winners. People want to be beautiful. People want to be smart. People want to be successful. You don't get any of that in your world of fair. So I'm glad he shared his thoughts. And I know a lot of people would hear it and think, yeah, fair. No, I've seen enough people. I've seen enough of life to think you don't want fair. The rat certainly thought I was unfair. We like vicariousness. We like beauty. We like achievement. The world is richer for it. And in fact, none of us want to live in that other world. And then if God foisted that world on us, I think we'd be saying, it's not fair. So there's my answer. Leave a comment.
Well, I don't know about the meaning crisis, left, right, black, white, or other vices, which Jesus Christ is right, or if we're all saved. From my perspective, our propositions participate procedurally, running in circles. We're in body, we're in the age of decay. Symbolically speaking, the reapers are reaping, them damn egregores are whispering sweetly. We're all NPCs in the belly of the beast. Red pill, blue pill, bread pill, Mars Hill, or DMT, or whatever you feel. Got one and number two, it's all the same damn thing. So clean your room, repent on Zoom, ontology for dummies, a bird's eye view. 'Cause if you really knew, could you really even say? Totally depraved, all totally saved, a total disposition from the bed we all made. Or is it the elect, or are we just insane? From John Vervaeke to Jonathan Pajot and Jordan Peterson to the Chris Pacou Show, Paul Vanderklays and Griswold Grimm and all the dice he shakes. This estuary ditty is a little bit cringy, ain't quite the U-shaped or the hero's journey. All the NPCs in the flood treading water to watch you save the day with a bunch of chitter-chatter. From the ortho bros to the Catholic Joes, or atheistic Jobs, to Protestant folks, the Joe Schmoes, and Jewish Jacobs, and everything in between. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own. So love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul, and with all your mind and your fingers and toes, all your neighbors too, as if they were your own.